I'd like to invite up onto stage three of my Workstream colleagues, Ash Cowie, who is head of video at Schroders, Rachel Allan, who is at AIG and a co-lead of ours, and James Whiteman, who's the co-head of content at UBS, and some very special guests, Vincent Keaveny, a former Lord Mayor of the City of London, who importantly chairs Progress Together and was really heavily involved in the City of London Workstream on diversity. So we're going to hear some fabulous insights from him. And also Stuart White, who, as long as I've been involved in the diversity project, has been an absolute superb champion and visible champion for all sorts of diversity issues. And of course, he's let us borrow his building today, so we've got to be nice to him. So if you'd like to come up and participate in the panel, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, David. You've also saved me a job because I now don't have to introduce everybody, so extra thank you for that. This panel, what we're hoping to do is to break down the reasons why we think that it's really important for businesses to consider social mobility as an asset, and then to look at the different barriers that we see and try and overcome those or find ways we can work around them. Please do send in questions online, and also in the room, raise your hand. You don't need to send them online, that would be slightly strange. And although I'll direct questions to individuals, I would say if you've got something to say, add to it. So don't feel because I haven't directed a question to you, you've got nothing to say there. So firstly, I think it's important for us to consider, what does social mobility mean to you? So I'll come to each of you individually. But Vincent, it would be good to go to you first and to find out what social mobility means to you, but also how you came about sort of launching Progress Together.
Thank you, Ashleigh. And on the Progress Together piece, I will try and keep that fairly short, as we're not good. It's not all about Progress Together today by any means. But social mobility for me is all about getting the best out of people and making sure that everybody has the opportunity really to show themselves and to allow their talent to work. And I think particularly important in the financial services industry, in the city, across the UK. We've heard from Helena a little bit of the motivations for that. I fully share her motivations. I came to this as a graduate recruitment partner in my previous firm back in the mid-2000s. I grew up in Dublin in Ireland in the 70s, at a time when Ireland was a very flat society, really. There wasn't very much, nobody had very much money in Ireland in the 1970s, to be perfectly honest about it, and everybody was sort of pretty much one generation removed from a small farm in the country. So it was a very different society. And working in the 90s, 80s, late 80s into the 90s in the city, suddenly coming across class, social background as a real determinant of outcomes for people in their careers, that was a bit of a wake-up. And seeing it as a graduate recruitment partner, then when I took that role, seeing how it's still so hardwired into the system made me think this is something that needs to be addressed. Coming up to the mayoralty, and it was one of the great privileges of being Lord Mayor of the City of London is that you have a year in which to do something impactful, to do something that actually can create a legacy. It's only a year, but you can use that year very purposefully. So I had the opportunity to focus on social mobility, socioeconomic diversity in the financial services sector in that year. The City of London Corporation was commissioned by the government. An initiative, I will give them credit, an initiative led by John Glenn, the then City Minister, and Nadeem Zahawi, who was a minister in the Bays Department at the time, set up a task force, commissioned the City of London Corporation to run this task force to look at this issue of progression and retention within the sector for those who come in from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And coming out of that, Progress Together, we launched it a little bit over 2 years ago, but actually only properly got up and running about 18 months back. And I think we're doing pretty well. We have 50 member firms now across the industry. We just got to that point very recently, about a third of the UK financial services workforce represented in that membership. But what is particularly, it's not that I'm sure in the diversity project you would feel the same way. You need your members, you need that number to be a healthy number. But what is really important is to see the extent of engagement now amongst those member firms. And that's what is changing. The new members are coming to us. I met the ExCo sponsor for social mobility at one of our new members just yesterday, and I was asking why, what brought them into Progress Together, and she said it was the board. A board discussion around this caused the firm to take this up and to get her to approach Progress Together, to look at joining Progress Together. That was driven by a discussion around the board, which means the work that Diversity Project is doing, the work that Social Mobility Foundation, that Progress Together is doing, is beginning to have an impact on the sector. We're being listened to, and that is beginning now to have some positive engagement, and that's what I'm most pleased about.
Great. And Stuart, the same question to you, but also how are you trying to implement this at HSBC Asset Management?
Thank you, Ash. But first of all, I just want to congratulate David, James, Rachel, and the Workstream, the Diversity Project Workstream, because what you're doing is absolutely transformational. And also, Vincent, just in terms of some of the things you said, I think the privileged position we have in our industry to have a real world impact across all aspects of diversity, equity, inclusion, I think is so powerful and is a privilege. And clearly, what we, our approach and our vision as HSBC, and I think as the Diversity Project, is to reflect the societies in which we operate. And we don't. We don't as an industry at the moment. So I think this is the vision, and this is what we're trying to achieve. I mean, from a personal perspective, I've got a bit of imposter syndrome sitting here because I had a privileged background. My parents are working class, and they put 5 boys through university. So I've got a lot to be grateful for. And I grew up in Manchester, which was a real experience in terms of very multicultural people from all backgrounds in terms of the activities I was involved in, whether it was sport. And I came to London, quite frankly, and was quite surprised, and in fact shocked when I first joined the asset management industry at how there was so much sort of hiring of in one's image, hiring from a certain set of universities, and it was far from diverse. And we've clearly gone a long way since then, but there's a huge way to go still. So at HSBC, we have a good starting point. We're a very international and very diverse organisation by nature of our heritage. But within HSBC Asset Management, we really wanted to embrace and drive diversity and equity inclusion even further. So we have a very active diversity, equity, inclusion program, which has actually, quite frankly, been modelled off the Diversity Project. We have 11 work streams. We've got wonderful co-chairs, all volunteers. Jazz, Faye are 2 of the co-chairs of our social mobility work stream. And each of our management committee either sponsor or co-sponsor our work streams. So Joanna in the room here is one of the sponsors, as I am. And so we have this top-down approach and the bottom-up approach. So we've got Isabelle Boursier, our French CEO. We've got Edmund Stokes, our global COO. And we've got our Dom Skevington in Hong Kong, Global Head of Strategy, 3 sponsors of the social mobility work stream, and providing energy, support, and endorsement. And what we've done over the last 5 years now is we've built this into a real bottom-up approach within the firm. So we're 3,000 employees. We have 300 active volunteers across all our work streams, just to give you a sense of how embedded it is. And also in terms of how we then embed D&I into our investment processes and the way we engage with underlying companies, again, with the privilege of the capital that we're managing on behalf of clients, to have that positive impact. And it's for financial return. It's doing good, but it's for financial return, clearly. And just to give you a couple of examples, please stop me if I'm overrunning here.
Stop him soon.
A couple of examples around social mobility. And you'll be hearing from our wonderful colleague Harleen in a second. We have, for 2 years now, run a degree apprenticeship program focused on individuals from socio-economic backgrounds. We support Upreach, Kickstart, 10,000 black interns, 10,000 able interns. We support in Hong Kong Inspiring Girls charity, which is about bringing girls into financial services from effectively state school equivalents or the not the main schools. And in this very room, every summer, we have a 2-day work experience program where we bring in school children, typically between the ages of 11 through to 16, from schools all around the country, again with a socio-economic aspect. We had 130 last year in this very room. And just 2 days of work experience at HSBC on your CV is gold dust. And so that's the sort of thing that I would absolutely encourage all member firms to do. It's not a big commitment, and it has a real world impact in the lives of children. So those are just some examples.
Absolutely loads for us to unpick there, but we will stop speaking to Stuart just for now. And actually, what a shame to hear you talk about imposter syndrome, because we were only at an event yesterday talking about the importance of allyship. So very important that everybody gets behind this. Now, James, on to you. And firstly, so what is, for you, social mobility-wise, important? But then also, can you tell us a bit about the Workstream, what we're trying to achieve, and give a bit of background around that?
Yeah, thanks, Ash. Of course, I'd love to expand on that. I mean, I think similar to Vincent and Stuart in terms of, I'm driven by a massive kind of sense of fairness, and I think you look around the industry. You know, I came into the industry in 2006 in Bristol, and then moved into London 2010 to 2011, and you can just kind of see it's kind of palpable, the lack of diversity, and that's across all of the characteristics. But it was only really when David asked me to join the Workstream that I started thinking about social mobility as being an issue from a DE&I perspective. I think you start to think about social mobility in more of a deep way, and you start to really unpick it, and you realise how it cuts across so many different aspects of diversity. So that's really where I guess, you know, I came at this from, is just David asked me to join the Workstream, and then as soon as you start thinking about it, you realise how important it is to the whole of the diversity agenda. I mean, Helena touched on this in her introduction, but we're really starting now, I think, to get into a level of discussion and debate around diversity, which is thinking about cognitive diversity in its round, and not just thinking about it from a box ticking point of view or a brochure point of view. You know, how does your team or your organisation look on paper? We're actually really starting to think about what difference does this make to an organisation, to a team, the decisions that they're making. So I think for me that was a big wake-up call. You know, I was kind of reflecting on why did I get involved, and it was just a simple request, but it's led me to an unbelievable position where I've been privileged enough to sit on a work stream, to lead a work stream that's actually making a real difference. And for the diversity project to have put it as one of their 3 priorities is just, you know, it's phenomenal. To have been part of, I guess, a kind of zeitgeist, and David mentioned that this has risen up the consciousness of DE&I agenda. To have set up our work stream at a similar time to the socio-economic task force that was set out of the government, and then to be sitting here with Vincent and collaborating, it's a real privilege. And I guess that touches on, you know, why did we set up the work stream and what have we been up to? We started with very much an awareness agenda because it just wasn't on people's minds. So a lot of it was around writing blog posts, speaking to academics, interesting people, just trying to understand the issue ourselves, and then to communicate that out to others in the best way that we could. But now, I think 3 years on, and this moment for us is a bit of a line in the sand, you know, launching a toolkit, having such an amazing event hosted here at HSBC, I think it's a bit of a line in the sand of moving from the talking and the... and I know that every diversity characteristic has suffered from this. You know, there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of awareness raising, but actually coming down to the tangible points of making a difference, it is difficult. But we've got so many case studies in our toolkit, and so many examples of really great work. So I think today kind of marks a bit of a line in the sand for us as moving from awareness to actually action.
Take the microphone back. And then, firstly, before I ask Rachel, I will just point out that last night we had somebody drop out of our panel, and Rachel is the hero of our panel by stepping in at last minute. So, Rachel, if you can tell us a bit about the importance of social mobility for you, and then I know in our workstream we talk a lot about recruitment, and if you can just touch on that and the sort of barriers to the recruitment stage.
Thank you. So why is social mobility important to me? I have quite a similar story to Helena. I grew up in quite a modest background, but I grew up in the West Country, very, very far away from London and the South East. And I went to my local comprehensive, and there were no role models. There was no one who worked in the city. There was no one who had a connection to anyone who worked in the city. And I would go so far as to say that I didn't know what asset management was until I was in my 30s. So for me, social mobility is about avoiding that repetition and having an industry where we have better representation of people from all socioeconomic backgrounds and at all levels of our organisations. So social mobility is really important to me. And, you know, I was delighted to be welcomed into the workstream by David and James. So thank you for having me. In terms of recruitment, I would say at an early careers stage, what I see across the industry is that the barriers to entry are still pretty high. We're still largely asking for graduates from particular university groups, graduates with 2-1s. So I'd really like to see broader initiatives to welcome people who have taken different paths and different routes into the industry. I'd like firms to start thinking a little bit more about contextual recruitment. If you have 3 Bs at A-level and you've been to a very disadvantaged school, is that the same as having 3 Bs from an elite institution? I'm not sure, and I would like member firms to start thinking a little bit more creatively around that. I'd also like firms to think a little bit more about potential. You know, I run graduate assessment centres in my day job, and I still sort of hear a lot of, oh, they were so polished, they were so articulate. And I'd really like people just to think much more about what skills people are bringing to the table and how they could, what potential they have. And then just on experienced hire recruitment, so we can talk a lot about early careers, but experienced hire recruitment, you know, I still see a lot of people hiring from a very small pool of organisations. They're maybe not thinking about transferable skills that people from outside of the industry could bring into our industry. And lastly, just to ask people to think less about cultural fit in their recruitment and a little bit more about cultural add so that we can diversify our industry a little more quickly.
Great. And then actually I'm going to just springboard straight onto Vincent here, because I feel like talking about recruitment is definitely, it's an area that I think is getting a lot of focus now, rightly so. But actually tracking progress and looking at the whole sort of career life cycle, how do you think we can improve that? What are the areas that you think are a problem there?
It's a really critical question.
It's a really critical question. There's so much really good stuff happening at the recruitment level, and most of the thought, most of the focus has been on that. One of the reasons we set the government asked the city corporation to set up that task force in 2020 was beginning to become obvious that there's a problem, that we have a very leaky bucket. A lot of talent is being recruited, but it's not being retained within the industry, or if it is staying in the industry, it's progressing much more slowly. So this is a career-long issue that needs to be addressed. A lot of that is around processes. One of our mantras in Progress Together, I know you feel very much the same way at the diversity project as well, is it's all about fixing processes, not people. So you've got to look at the processes that are at work at all the various stages within a career life cycle in an organization. Whether that's the allocation of work within teams, who gets on the big juicy profitable mandates, for instance, you know, who's looking after particular clients. It's the senior sponsorship. the absence, looking at some of the information that we've accumulated in Progress Together, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are 17% less likely to have a senior sponsor within an organization in the financial services industry. That's a critical issue as well. So all of these come together. You've got to start looking at the various processes that apply right through that career life cycle, so that you're giving people the opportunity to get right through and make progress at the same and comparable speeds as those who come in from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. Again, one of the stats underpinning the work of the task force was a bit of research we conducted in 2020, which established that individuals in the sector from lower socioeconomic backgrounds progress around about 25% more slowly than those who come in from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. We're looking at that, and we're collecting data. Progress Together collected data on I think the data set was about 149,000 people last year amongst our member firms submitting data to us that we were able to analyze, bearing out that same sort of progression gap. A little bit less than 25%, but still a significant progression gap for those coming into the industry from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. The interesting thing, again, is the cross-cutting nature of it. I hate the word intersectionality. I really don't like intersectionality. Andy Haldane, who's co-chair with me of the task force, Andy, in one of our early meetings, said that no word in the English language should have 7 syllables, and I sort of agree with him on that. But on the cross-cutting nature of this, again, there is double and treble disadvantage if you look at combining socioeconomic background with gender and with ethnicity. So it is absolutely critical to getting positive outcomes on these other protected characteristics too. Focus in on that. Look at the life cycle.
So today, can we ban intersectionality as a word? Yeah.
That is a word that is used a lot in our discussions. No, there's some really fair points there, and actually you touched a lot on data, which is a huge asset, I would say, in terms of we're really trying to build that data to build the sort of stats that can support the arguments we're making. But it's also a huge problem because businesses aren't all used to collecting data, and is it mandatory? And there's a lot of questions around data at the moment. So Rachel, I wondered if you can give us a bit of background to why data is important and why it's needed.
Thank you. And just to add to what you're saying there, Ash, we see the latest FCA report, asking what diversity and inclusion data should we be collecting, and obviously we're advocating that socioeconomic data is included in that. And as David highlighted earlier, the number of firms collecting socioeconomic data could be significantly improved, and that's what we're asking all of our member firms to get involved with. And if you open the toolkit, it has all the questions that we would recommend that you ask people. And if you can only ask one question, that has to be around parental occupation when you were around the age of 14. So why do we need it? If we don't really truly understand the demographic of our workforce, then how do we know where we have underrepresentation? We might have a bit of a feel for it, but really getting into the data will really demonstrate where our gaps are. And then we can really put in place programs, activities, initiatives that can help to close the gap. And that could be throughout the employee life cycle. We were talking earlier about recruitment, but as Vincent mentioned, at each stage of an employee going through an organisation, how are we making sure that we can measure progress? Are those people being promoted at the same rate as their peers from higher socioeconomic backgrounds? But I do want to pull on something that David said earlier, which is that don't let the lack of data be your reason for inaction. So let's start taking action sooner rather than later. Let's understand our workforce better, and let's try and close some of those gaps.
I actually was having an interesting conversation with Stuart earlier about the importance of keeping going when there's not data. So I wonder if you can just add a little bit there.
Yeah. Thank you. No, absolutely. So, I mean, we work in asset management, financial services. Data is, is the lifeblood of what we do and how we analyze organizations. But when it comes to DE&I, we absolutely cannot get hung up on the lack of data in certain characteristics, and particularly on a global basis, because we're very privileged in the UK and other countries like the US and Hong Kong, where we're relatively well advanced. But when you look at other countries around the world, there's a long way to go. So for me, we absolutely need to drive the data discussion. We need more data provision voluntary through our community. I think there's there's reasons to be cheerful at the moment, because I think one of the great initiatives from the Diversity Project has been the Asset Owner Diversity Charter. And it's UK centric, but what Emma and Helen have done there, they've got now, I think, 26 of the largest asset owners, pension schemes, insurance companies to sign up, 1.6 trillion pounds of investor capital. And if you go online, you can see their questionnaire, the questionnaire that is being driven now through investment consultants to asset management companies and RFPs. And there is a socio-economic aspect to the questionnaire. And it is based on what did your parents do at your age when you were 14 years old, and it's split out at different levels of the asset management organisation, at company level, board level, executive level, and PMs as a cohort, which is great. And I think what we're beginning to see is more and more organisations taking it seriously. We've got a long way to go, as we saw on the chart. But I'm convinced that pie chart will look very different over the next 12 months, because all the investment consultants and asset owners with the big mandates are driving this change. So I think that's really, really important, really positive. But we should not get hung up on not having data. We should continue to do things, all the great initiatives through the Diversity Project and within our member firms. Just keep going, and the capital that's driving this change will create the momentum, and we will create the momentum bottom up. Thank you.
I think one of the other things about the data issue as well is that we're particularly bad at self-identifying. It's such a complex issue, social mobility. So, I often think about this in terms of it was amazing hearing Helena's story earlier, but how many people would have made an assumption with her walking in the room around where she went, her background and where she went to school. Sometimes I think, I could tell my story in two different ways. I could say that grew up, had a single parent, lived in a 2-bedroom house in a pretty run-down kind of rural area of Devon, bit of a backwater, went to a state school, and you can kind of create a narrative around that. But equally, I could then say, well, I was the third person in my family to go to university. My grandfather went to Cambridge. My dad was a lecturer at Harvard. So there's lots of very different ways that you can create your own origin story. And we tend to then be not very good at interpreting other people's origin stories as well. And the data can actually cut through a lot of that. So actually, if you ask me the question about my parental the main household earner when I was age 14, my mum was a teacher, so I would be in a very privileged position, surrounded by culture and books and education. So and obviously I have the additional benefit of being a white male, which adds another layer or 2 layers of privilege.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to pick up on, it's something that we've all spoken about actually, whether when we look at businesses that we invest in and engagement we have with different businesses, whether it should be something that's mandated that we put in socio-economic data within that and the importance of doing that. And I don't know if, Stuart, if you've got something to add there.
Thank you. So I've got a personal view, which is we shouldn't mandate. But I think what's happening through, as I said, the Asset Owner Diversity Charter is, the industry has come together and created a framework around all different dimensions of D&I that they're expecting asset managers now to report on and show improvement year on year, including socio-economic data. and gender and LGBTQI+, and more will come. I think what we do need to do, though, and I know the discussions at the Acedona Advisory Board is around going to the next level. So within the quantum qual questionnaires coming from the Acedonas, to also ask how they are embedding DE&I factors into how they invest and how they engage with underlying investee companies. Because the reason the Acedonas are doing this, clearly it's the right thing to do, but it's for better financial return. And that needs to flow through all the way through to the underlying investee companies. So ultimately then we're having the positive societal impact in different industries, in different countries, and we'll see that flow back through into the investment returns and the benefits to members, etc. So I think that's the next step in the evolution. Some of our firms will be doing this already or will be on that journey, but we should be engaging with the companies we invest in about what they are doing to change their socio-economic policies and their gender policies and their mental health policies, etc., etc. So for me, this is a really, really important sort of next step for the investment management industry. So, yeah, thank you.
Great. I think that is important when you're talking about allyship, when you're trying to make the case to other people who see this as potentially just a fluffy subject that's a nice to have. Actually, when it comes to it and financial return is at stake, I think it's a good language to be using. And actually, hopefully, we get some more data and case studies around that as well. Vincent.
Could I touch on another, I think another important facet of this, which was mentioned, which is the international dimension, particularly in organizations like this and many of the other bigger city institutions that have an international footprint. Many of the D&I characteristics are difficult, in some cases almost impossible in some parts of the world to address. You can't ask people about the sexual orientation in some parts of the world because you're talking about issues of illegality. So these are dangerous and really difficult areas for people to engage with. Socioeconomic background is something you can engage with, and in many organizations it's a way in parts of the world where it's difficult to talk about other aspects of the DE&I agenda. It's a way into that agenda. It's a way for companies to begin to engage staff and across the world on this important issue. So I think there is that benefit too, and it's another area where the City of London, the UK financial and professional services sector can lead the world and can inculcate really good practices across the world, as well as really benefiting workforces internationally too.
We've actually, it's a really good point at the global angle, and we found that it's quite tricky to pin down what a lower socio-economic background means in a different region. And there is pushback on whether you went to private school, because that means a very different thing in a different place. So I wonder if anyone has experience sort of handling that.
We have found, talking to a number of our member firms that Progress Together, they ask that question about parental occupation at the age of 14. It seems to work internationally, but you've got to recalibrate the answer depending on the social circumstances of the country you're operating in. I don't know whether, Stuart, that's something that HSBC has dealt with.
I don't think we have, actually. I mean, we have in our HR Direct, again, it's voluntary data and it's only in the UK. It's the UK, Hong Kong, and the US where we're asked to provide an answer to the question, which is the question that we had. What do your parents do at the age of 14? And as a proxy, I think it is. And again, this goes back to data. As a proxy, I think it gives the right direction of travel. But I think we can become more sophisticated, and I think maybe some of the questions that are coming out of the toolkit will begin to help really sort of focus in. On a more accurate picture. I mean, just as an example, at 14 years old, my father worked in a factory. He then became a factory owner and put us all through university, and we had a privileged background. But that wouldn't be captured through this sort of process. So yeah, I think there's a way to go. And I also I was talking to the head of D&I at Oxford University recently, and they're doing some very interesting work around looking at D&I in different countries. So inclusion and equity should be global. You know, we recognise diversity has got to be more nuanced locally because of legal reasons, etc. But also within sectors. Within sectors, you know, whether it's manufacturing or financial services, there are very different profiles of D&I as well. So, you know, we can be much more subtle as we develop this moving forward. And there's a lot of academic research being sort of focused in this area because the capital is beginning to recognise this as a super important area. So, not sure I answered that.
Thank you. And actually, I just want to make sure that we don't run out of time before I come to James and ask about the toolkit. So can you tell us, mention there how it could be useful for different firms to sort of see this from a global perspective, but can you tell us why the toolkit was created, what you're trying to achieve with it, and how people that are watching this would be able to use it in a useful way?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ashleigh. I can definitely talk to that. I mean, David touched on this a little bit, and I did one of my earlier kind of answers, but you know, we created it to be a practical tool that people could use. So it's full of case studies. I think there's 7. We've got HSBC, we've got Aviva Investors, Hermes, Newton, Invesco, and then we've also included a case study from Brown Jacobson, who's an outside of industry example of, you know, a real top achiever in terms of social mobility and what they've achieved. And Tom Lyas actually spoke at one of our diversity project events a year or so ago, and amazing kind of story and what they've achieved. So, you know, there's examples of case studies across all the different areas of, I guess, the social mobility journey, for want of a better phrase. So, you know, whether it's early careers, whether it's apprenticeships, whether it's work experience, whether it's around data collection and what's worked, what hasn't, the types of messages and how you want to frame the message to your organisation in terms of getting buy-in and understanding why you're asking the questions, why you're interested in this. You know, some people do come to the topic of DE&I from a sceptical point of view, so helping them through that is really important, and getting the messaging right in terms of, you know, why you're asking for it, and then the governance around, you know, explaining the governance around the data and how it's going to be used is kind of critical, and that comes through, you know, in the examples of the toolkit. And I think it's just a really great example of the diversity project in action, where you think this membership-based organisation, you know, we all learn from each other. We learn from mistakes, but we also learn from what's worked well. So that's really what we've tried to infuse into the toolkit itself. So it's full of facts and figures at the start. There's a bit of definitional work, just setting the scene, framing the issue. There's some stats that we've pulled from the goals and progress tool that the Diversity Project has. I think David touched on a couple of the data points in there, but there's a few more as well. And then it really gets into the detail of walking you through the journey of DE&I. And it's not necessarily a linear thing, you know, so you can pick it up, and wherever you're planning an intervention or wherever your organisation feels like they want to start, there's definitely something in there for you. It covers the whole life cycle. And I always think, you know, some people kind of ask us, well, where should we start? And data's the obvious one, but, you know, sometimes it's just start anywhere, just pick somewhere. You could just open it and you just need to get going. And I guess to the point around not having enough data, and sometimes using that as an excuse and sort of falling behind that. I think just start somewhere, whether it's setting up an ERG, thinking about, you know, and sending off an email to a contact.
Storytelling.
Yeah, storytelling. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the stories, we're going to, hopefully the 4 of us will get off stage soon, and we're going to hear some really great stories. So, yeah, sorry.
No, that's really useful. Thank you. And hopefully everyone can go and check out the toolkit and use it, and please give feedback on it as well, because it's obviously something we want to keep changing and adapting. Question here. Now, we started planning this panel before the announcement of the UK election, and apologies to people who are watching who are from different countries. This is very UK-centric, but what do we think is going to be the impact of the UK election, and how do we think it might impact the social mobility agenda? I wonder if anyone has a particular view. Vincent? He's itching.
I'm sure we all have views about how it might impact indeed, but there was one very significant announcement today in the publication of the Labour Party manifesto. They said that they were going to implement the socio-economic duty that is a feature of the Equalities Act, which was not implemented. It's in the legislation, but it was never implemented. And I think implementing that, getting it right in the implementation is going to be, of course, a big issue for business, and indeed not just the private sector, but the public sector as well. But it would be a hugely significant step forward. Socioeconomic background is not a legally protected characteristic, but the introduction of this duty would really transform the way business and public and private sector approaches it. I think it would also then, I suspect, would be quite influential in terms of the regulators' attitude towards a socioeconomic background. And of course, we know there was a consultation exercise at the end of last year. The FCA and PRA went out to consultation. Many organisations represented here today responded to that. So I think I think the direction of travel around this will be very interesting to watch over the next year or two, and it could be that announcement in the Labour Party manifesto today, if Labour find themselves in government, as seems quite possible given the polls, that we might be looking at socioeconomic background being right at the heart of the DE&I agenda over the next few years, which will be a really interesting place to be.
Brilliant. And actually, I can see online that somebody has asked, they missed the point on banning intersectionality. I'm glad I got that word out. And actually, I just want to make sure we return to this, because we're not saying that shouldn't exist. We're saying the word shouldn't exist for that exact reason, that nobody can say it. But I wonder if we can just quickly cover the importance of the sort of cross-referencing across different sections. Anybody, raise your hand.
Thank you. I mean, maybe just this is way too simplistic, but for me, organisations that get D&I right across all the different dimensions have better decision making. And we talk about diversity of thought, but ultimately it's about better decision making at all levels, whether it's hiring people, whether it's promoting people, whether it's in a management meeting or in a board meeting. And for me, this is the starting point. And we talked about yesterday the diversity project about repositioning the narrative of the diversity project. And for me, that is the starting point. And I guess I hate to say next to my friend here, but intersectionality is a glue that connects it all. And ultimately we're human beings, and we have a brain, and we think differently. We come from different backgrounds. We have different preferences, but ultimately it's about diversity of thought. And with that, if organisations get it right, they will make better decisions and they'll be more successful. It's a very simple thesis, but I'm passionate about that.
I agree. I think there is a absolutely fundamental business imperative, as well as the sort of the social justice imperative, to getting this right. But just on that, we're doing a little bit of work in progress together over this year. It's one of the things on the to-do list this year, which is to look at the interventions that work across various of the ED&I challenges that we face. It's the Venn diagram. So what sits there in the middle of all of these various areas of focus and areas of activity for our organizations? What sits in the middle, and what's in a way, where do you get the biggest bang for your buck? And that's a piece of work we're doing at the moment with 2 or 3 other organizations that are looking at other protected characteristics that have got specific focuses. I think we'll be publishing something on that towards the end of the year. So a little bit of intersectionality at work there.
You just said that.
Well, we were just talking before the panel as well about what that actually means, and in terms of whether it's reverse mentoring, buddying, all of these things show up regardless of the diversity characteristics, it's often the same type of intervention, career advice or whatever it happens to be. So I think that's really important. And then just to build on, I think Helena did a really good job of introducing the way in which the diversity project is trying to sort of shift and almost, I guess, approach the backlash to D&I and actually deepen the business case for it. And we spent a lot of time yesterday in a workshop sort of thinking about that. But ultimately, it comes back to the simple fundamentals of how Stuart's identified it, but trying to get some academics to help us sort of prove the business case. Because we know that some of the studies that have come out have been criticised because they didn't have necessarily the rigour, and I don't want to call out certain consultancies, but a big focus for us in the next 1 to 2 years is going to be helping academia to figure out how they can help us prove the business case. And of course, we don't want to prejudge what the results would end up being, but I think there is definitely more that we can collaborate on to try and help sort of solve that puzzle.
Thank you. And so I actually, touching on the event that we were at yesterday, all of the diversity project work streams said that the one thing they really wanted to focus on was working together more. So I imagine there will be more of this and more events and cross-section sort of discussions. So definitely more of that. And we are really tight on time, but I just want to make sure that I haven't missed any questions that are in the room. Oh, good. We've got one.
Just as a quick aside, if I have time, on the intersectionality point, as it's a hot topic, I do think there was a serious point there about the word, which is that if we use sort of excessively academic language, it can, I guess, restrict the conversation to, elite circles. So I do think there's a serious point, and I dislike the word as well. But my question followed on from what Rachel made some good points I liked about people who are polished and articulate, and then cultural fit versus cultural add. My question is, I feel like there's a kind of push and pull in terms of where we encourage companies to stop judging people on that basis versus mentoring and teaching people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to kind of adapt, if you like. I'd be interested in the panel's thoughts on the interaction between those two things. Should we be doing more helping people to fit in, or telling companies not to make them fit in?
Do you want to talk?
Just very quickly on the intersectionality point, I totally agree, and I think that was really Andy Haldane was making a slightly joking point of it, but that's actually the issue, that we need to talk about these issues, these challenges in ways which engage people and which don't turn people off or antagonize people. And I'm afraid that some of the language we use when we're those of us who are talking about these things a lot have exactly that downside. And I'm afraid intersectionality is one of those words that does. It grates with a lot of people. But I'm going to look. Do you want to tackle the real question?
Tackle the tough question. Yeah. It's a real fine balance. It's a great question. I think one thing you don't want to lose is people's authenticity and their difference. And it is a real danger if you try, but inadvertently, and you can be very well-meaning about it, but you try to kind of put them into a straitjacket that you think is the way that something should be done, or the way that something should be presented, the way that someone speaks. We all understand and realise that accent bias exists. So I think, for me, it's a fine balance between coaching somebody to become a bit more confident within themselves, and I'm still working on that myself for sure, but then not kind of eradicating the difference and their personality and their nuances and all the brilliant things that they can bring. So it's a tricky one, and it's a very good question. I don't know if the HR specialist wants to add.
I mean, I would say that, organisations need a diverse workforce. They need to be accepting of everyone's background and create a sense of belonging regardless of your upbringing. And I think that there is also the part of how do people work to adjust to an organisation. We all adjust ourselves slightly to be in the teams that we're in our workplaces, and to be successful, and to say the right things in front of our clients. So I agree with James. I think it's a really fine balance. And I think primarily, I would say organisations need to be much more welcoming and much more foster a sense of belonging for everybody. And then I think there's that very slight bit where you might just need to bend yourself slightly in order to achieve. I don't quite speak like this in my real life.
Great.
Thanks.
I'm actually acutely aware that we are running over. So I will just thank all of our panelists and everyone for their questions as well, and hand over to the next panel.